Alright, so as you can see, we're doing something just a tiny bit different this time, where I've been... I actually had another one already planned for this week, and that was before we had heard about the loss of one of my absolute favorite character actors in John Hurd, so I decided to change it up a little bit for one reason in particular, which was I've had this DVD of Cutter's Way forever, and the reason I have it is because it was around the time, this was years and years ago, when I was really into Jeff Bridges' older stuff, and I was discovering kind of his older body of work from like the 70s and forward, after everything from The Last Picture Show and forward, in the next couple of decades. And I just found this laying around at a store, like a really cheap store, and another thing that really struck me about it, not just the fact that Bridges was in it, but that John Hurd was apparently a leading character in it, which is something you pretty much hardly ever saw in any time period. And so I just kind of picked this up, and then I hadn't watched it in years, and the thing that really stunned me was when the news broke about him, everybody knew this movie. And I had no, I thought it was just this random thing in the 80s that was just really obscure and just really off the map that pretty much nobody knew about. And then once he was gone, everybody was talking about Cutter's Way. It amazed me. um, and talking about how it's like one of the most underrated performances ever and one of the most overlooked. And I'm not going to dispute that. It's one of those things that you kind of question where it's like actors suddenly become the most beloved thing ever in death. But I had always heard, the thing was he was kind of so off the radar and always in such these small side parts after a while that there was really kind of no reason to talk about his body of work. There was no real motivation to. And there should have been a reason because he was amazing, but and it would kind of bum me out when I was thinking about it because I was like, his parts were kind of so small and his movies so kind of to the side that I don't think I've ever really gotten the chance to talk about that, except maybe a reference to Home Alone here or there, or Big. But yeah, so I kind of want to do this. Obviously, you'll notice the movies the movie I decided to do it with, they have nothing in common. This is definitely more of a not we are going to discuss both movies like as the movies, but obviously this is more about two performances that I'd like to discuss that had to go to similar places, not necessarily the movies themselves having a lot in common, because they really, really don't. Practically nothing, except for the fact that their main characters are Vietnam veterans and have been... What they do in these movies comes basically from how the war affected them. Obviously much more directly in Ron Kovic's case, but in Cutter's Way, more of a... Yeah, we'll get... Actually, I want to start with Cutter's Way, even though I usually do the more popular movie first. And the interesting thing about this movie... Well, the thing is when I talk about Cutter's Way, I will mention the fact that I kind of understand why this performance was so under the radar and why people didn't always talk about it among the great performances. And I think, to start with, it's worth noting that this movie, while having this insane performance in it, is pretty much a very kind of... It's a character movie. It's a character-driven movie. But the whole setup and the whole framing is this extremely straightforward thriller. To pretty much kind of a forgettable extent, is how much. It's very... We got this very De Palma opening when Bridges his car's broken down in this rainy alleyway, and he sees a dude dump a dead body into a dumpster. And so he decides, basically, he might investigate this, and he's gonna go talk to his best friend about this, Vietnam veteran Alex Cutter, and that is when the movie really reaches a point where we feel like there's something different in this movie than all the other movies that have plots that are pretty much exactly like this. Those very, forgettable, cheesy B-movies that were just everywhere in the 70s and 80s. Like I said, may or may not have often had De Palma's name on them. and when we see this character, you realize immediately, right after it happened, Daniel Stern posted a big thing, and told a whole story about his background with him. And the thing that I learned reading that I never knew was that apparently around in the 70s, John Hurt was all the rage on the stage, where he was basically the envy of all the other actors, and he had like all the really big parts, and he just like really tore up that stage when he was on it back then, to the point where he was the actor that the other fellow actors aspired to be. And those stage roots really do come through in his performance as Cutter, especially in this very first scene, when you realize that while there are certainly some subtleties in there, a lot of the performance is playing to the back. It's very big, this performance, but there are moments though that we know this actor very well because we have seen him in so many different things, and he's in some movies that are just etched in our brains forever, like the Home Alone movies and Big. But when you look at Alex Cutter in this first scene, you have to do like a triple take to realize that this is an actor an actor you know very well, because this character just completely takes over. Like, even all the way down to his voice. His voice was always very recognizable. A lot of the time, you can't even tell that if you don't know. And that's the thing, is we've seen him in stuff like, and not just the movies, but the roles as well. Because obviously, we know him as the dad in Home Alone. He was Tom Hanks' rival in Big. And then he had stuff like, he kind of tried to take, well, Paul Schrader kind of tried to get him to take on this leading man status in Cat People, and then he had the part in the Trip to Bountiful opposite Geraldine Page's Oscar-winning part. Another movie I thought that he was really good in that kind of went off was when he played Julia Stiles' dad in O. That's a really good performance from him. And all of these performances are kind of different in their own way. He sometimes played an antagonistic character a lot, and then sometimes the kind of more gentle characters there. There was also his part in Beaches, obviously. And when you look at all that stuff, you look at what came before it. Cutter's Way came before any of that. But even though that's kind of the stuff we really first think of when we see him, unless you're a huge Cutter's Way fan, you cannot see him when you look at Alex Cutter. It's like he's not in there at all. Even when you go back and watch like interviews with him, he just seemed like this really, kind of gentle, normal person. And so it's just complete insanity to watch him become this person. Now, when you watch, say, like, every now and then the, hugeness of it will die down and he'll go smaller, like when they're in the diner and they're talking about kind of their plan of action and what exactly is going on. They're kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Number one, there you can tell he's John Hurt if you're looking hard enough. And also, he's very kind of calm. Like, his voice kind of changes, too, to where, like, he kind of gets really downplayed, like when he's really concentrated and when he's really trying to put these pieces together. But then, once he's in this, of course, it's worth noting, this is a scene where he is relatively sober. And the thing he talked about, actually, in an interview was that he was less trying to play up the Vietnam veteran aspect of this character and more about the married drunk aspect of him. And just that part of his troubled psyche that just happens to have the Vietnam inside him as well. Because he's basically been, even though he's got that in there somewhere, the alcoholism is pretty much what's consumed him by this point. And that's pretty much what drives his character throughout this movie and kind of makes him unpredictable. And there's moments where, like I guess, when he sits down at the diner and they're talking, he's fine. But then once he goes back into drunk mode, we're watching a man disappear, and he's able to kind of play with that throughout the movie, where there are those moments when he's obviously this really big character. When he's the big character, usually it's kind of the reverse. It's where, like, when we see a character being really big, but then he also has subtle moments, you immediately jump on the subtle moments are the character that's the real parts of the character, and what's really big and in your face is the facade. But with Alex Cutter, that seems to be the reverse, where when he's, like, drunk and, like, breaking stuff and just going all off, it's kind of like we're really seeing him. And when he's more downplayed, that appears to be the facade, because one of the few times throughout the movie we see him calm and seemingly sober, he's always kind of trying to weasel his way out of something. Like when he gets into a fight with his neighbor and the cops show up, and he does the whole. He's able to transition from hollering and being drunk to, oh well, I'm sorry, officer, but you see, I know you have to do your duty, and I know all about that, and I apologize for running into the car, but you see, I with my eye and everything, I can't do that. And then when the neighbor wants to lunge at him, it's just, hey man, you wouldn't hit a cripple now, would you? It's the way he's able to use that and kind of play off. Another thing where it kind of comes through very quickly was I like when he's breaking through the crowd at the parade, when Bridges is able to point out Cord in the parade, and he's kind of breaking through this crowd, and he's like, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, and then at the end it's just, get out of my way. And it's like the excuse me's of the facade, the get out of my way was really him. And also, another thing is, when you want to talk about subtlety, typically when an actor wants to go subtle, and you can't do this on the stage, of course, but in front of a movie camera, the secret weapon to an actor is their eyes. And obviously, he's got a bit of a setback here. He's only got one of them to work with. But he still uses the one eye he's got to really push forward with a lot of emotion. Particularly the scene when he gets back after seeing that the house is burned down. And he's really able to get, just using, like I said, just one eye is able to bring out enough emotion. I also really love the moment when he kind of realizes, he lets Bridges know that he knows he's been betrayed. And so it's one of those performances where it's almost like the subtle moments are great, but it's almost like, and like I said, a lesser actor would have really, really probably fucked this up. But with an actor that is so kind of lived in the stage before he really got in front of a movie camera, it's this whole idea of the bigger he goes, kind of the better it gets. Which, like I said, is a very, very thin line that a lot of actors would have very easily messed up. Because obviously, for most actors, you can only kind of go so big before you are going the wrong direction. But here, with this particular character, he kind of knew exactly where the ceiling was, but that ceiling was high. And he knew that, and he just totally went for it, and really, really made this big, memorable character. However, you do probably wonder, so why is this performance so overlooked? And I think it's because it's really inside a movie that can't do it justice. Because we've got a lot of distractions in this movie also that kind of take away from it, where it kind of shows you just if we had gotten more of this performance, how better the movie probably could have been. Because one of the big sidetracks of the movie, to me anyway, is this subplot with Bone and Cutter's wife. Where it's now, this isn't to hate on Jeff Bridges. Obviously, the whole reason I saw the movie to begin with is because I fucking love Jeff Bridges. But, and while I do think he handles Bone in just the right way, it feels like this is Heard's movie. And the movie suffers when he's not on screen. Because we have this subplot, like I was saying, with Bone and Cutter's wife, where they have this romance that was going to blossom, but then she went for Cutter, but it's still there. And they act on it. And this seems to be, it's not done in a very interesting way. These characters aren't near as interesting as Cutter's character, so it feels like the movie has very visibly come to a stop when we get to this point. And this scene goes on and on and on, and then we eventually have to, we're just waiting for that 80s love scene to happen, and we're just kind of waiting through this scene to get there, and then once it's over, we know we can get back to the really good stuff. And so it really takes away from those interesting aspects, and one moment that really makes that apparent is this right before this, we've had the moment where Bone was going to go in and hand off the blackmail note to get it to Cord, but he doesn't do it. So Cutter decides he's going to do it. And the thing here is you think, well, Cutter makes a spectacle out of everything. So it's like, this is going to be this really big, key moment when he's the one that gives off the letter. There's only one problem. We don't see this happen. We completely overlook this because we're so focused on the Bone and Cutter's wife subplot. And it's like, you really sacrificed what could have been another big Cutter scene for them to talk about their feelings and fuck. And it's like, when we're just waiting for the rest of the movie to come back. And it feels like it really dropped the ball. Now, I do kind of get it. Like, I get why the Cutter's wife subplot is there. Like, it really shows, like, it's a driving force for both of them. Like, we both know that they're there on an emotional level. Because obviously the big emotional impact of the scene is going to be when Cord has the house burned down and his wife is killed. But the thing is we don't just have one emotionally driven character. Now we have two very emotionally driven characters that are going to get us to this big showdown. So I do get it in that regard, but I feel like we spent a lot more time on it when we could have been watching much more interesting things play out. Because it's not the strongest plot. It's a very straightforward thriller blackmail plot. But the way these characters work and the way Cutter and Bone play off of each other, it's still really interesting to watch because, pretty much strictly because of the characters. And it just feels like the movie really drops the ball and doesn't really get into as many great places as it could. Like, this movie could be, like, once everything gets set off, like, once Bone points out that it's Cord and he knows that it's him, this movie should have been non-stop great scene after great scene, because you have characters like Cutter and Bone going through this whole blackmail scheme that blows up in their faces, pretty much literally. But there are just moments where the movie hits a total dead stop, because another character... this movie doesn't know how to handle its female characters, it seems to be, because the other character is Valerie, who is the sister of the initial victim. I don't know what the hell she's doing. The characters in the movie don't know what the hell she's doing, because her involvement in this whole thing is very fast. Like, it's easy to understand, you know, that it's like the sisters in Goldfinger, where the one wants to get involved kind of immediately and really take action, but it's like, here it just feels really kind of artificial and more like a script turning its wheels than characters taking their turns. And she just makes a lot of decisions here that are really hard to understand because we don't really go enough into her. She's a very surface character making a lot of really weird decisions throughout the movie. Like, there's the whole... When they're on the boat, she seems to have this random, very sudden, fast attraction to Bone. And then there's the moment in the car when Cutter's, like, got his hands all over, got his hand down her shirt and his hand up her skirt, and she's not even reacting. And it's like, who is this character, and what exactly is she doing? Cutter's wife even calls her out on it, where it's like, what? You're kind of in this suddenly. But I talk about the fact that she's a very surface character. Like, we don't really get to know much about her, which is what makes her confusing. But sometimes a lack of character can make a character more interesting, like in Cord's case, where he's built up to be this really, really big character, and we get this backstory on him from being a figure in George's past, a very sinister figure in their friend George's past. And we only kind of see him from a distance, but it's really played up how big of a deal he is. That it makes it a nice big moment when we're finally face to face and up close with him in the very last scene, and it feels like kind of a big real showdown we've been building to. So in that particular case, it works when we don't have a lot of character development going in. But for the most part, yeah, I do think that it's a movie. It's a performance that's lost due to the movie's quality. Is the problem? Because that's the thing I keep hearing people say is that it's like this performance just feels so lost in the shuffle, and it's like it really needs to be found, and it's really a shame that it seems to have taken his death to do that. But even though it's still kind of astonishing to me that people did seem to know about the movie, even though it was never really much talked about. And like I said, I really, really put that on the movie. It's like I said, it's not necessarily. I feel that people heard that John Hurt died and just wanted to seem informed, so they're like they just pulled out the movie that he had like the biggest role in. You could argue that he's still supporting to Bridges, but even despite the fact that he's the title character, but he's still, I'd still say it's a leading role for sure, and he's the one that really owns the movie and really brings the life to it. And I do feel like it's not just people, saying, oh, I just, like people just discovering Cutter's Way and then trying to play off that they've known it for years. I think it's just the fact that they appreciated his performance in Cutter's Way, but the movie itself is so not up to par with his performance that it kind of made it kind of fade away. Because if the movie itself isn't memorable, it's pretty much all on the performance, and that's a pretty difficult thing for a character actor to accomplish. But I do like that the movie does kind of seem to have found its spotlight again. So, and hopefully it can stay there a little longer than it has in the past. So yes, that's what it is. So it really is like for a while there he was kind of in like straight to DVD land. He had stuff like Edison Force. He was like a villain in or something, and it was just these really small movies that were in very straight to video territory, and it's really a shame that that happened. He actually mentioned, he has a quote on IMDb where he kind of talks about where he seemed to be in a good place at the time of his death, but he realized that he could have been in much bigger roles than he was, and he felt like that he had dropped the ball. But he was still happy to be just in movies. He was happy to be in studio movies, indie movies, pretty much anything. And I feel like he was always that actor where, like I said, this might have a lot to do with the kind of the fatherly outlook we got of him in Home Alone, and how that's clearly his most famous role. It's so weird that it's like he's barely in that movie when he had movies like Cutter's Way, but all the headlines say Home Alone actor. Because that's really what we all go to. So he was always that actor where pretty much anybody... Awakenings is another movie, as I didn't mention. Where every time he was in a movie, no matter how big or small the part, his little cameo in The Line of Fire made me really happy when I first saw it. He was just that actor where everybody felt good when they saw him. Everybody felt like they were going to get quality when he popped up in something, regardless of whether... You'll notice I failed to mention Sharknado. Yeah, that too, I guess. So yeah, it really is a huge loss. Hopefully one that people realize actually is a huge loss and isn't just people, saying in an empty way, oh, this dead actor was one of my favorites because he's dead now. No, I do feel like there was definitely a love for him throughout it. Obviously, mainly for his big roles in like Big and Home Alone and stuff like that, but really just anytime he was in something big or small, it was really exciting to see what he was going to do. So, with that having been said, let's talk about Born 4th of July real quick. This really big Oscar movie starring Hollywood superstar Tom Cruise. And going on, we'll actually go into the movie and then we'll go into Cruise kind of gradually. Obviously, this is another Oliver Stone movie that's very, very Oliver Stone movie. It was 3 years after he did Platoon, and it was him revisiting Vietnam again. To which he was in, I think, obviously Oliver Stone was in Vietnam. I think I heard he was in battle for like a year or something. So when he came back, he was really in this mindset and really wanted to show people this, and he was really anti that war, as most are, and he was showing us with Platoon kind of, just in general, just the battle, just Platoon is us right in the middle of that. Which of course, won him a couple of Oscars, and then 3 years later, he brought us Born on the 4th of July, which got him another Best Director Oscar. And the thing here is, I guess he'd been wanting to make Ron Kovic's book into a movie for a really long time. Like, it was a really delayed process. And when he finally got there, he was able to land Tom Cruise and kind of make wonders with this. And the thing, I guess we're going to start with Cruise, never mind. This is where I went. You look at Cruise's filmography at the time, because there was Top Gun is what really got him on the map, and people saw him as, they just saw him as Maverick, the leather jacket, the, young rebel type. And then there was stuff like Cocktail, which obviously sucks. And then there is, obviously the year right before this, we'd had Rain Man, which obviously is an incredible performance from him. But for the most part, going into Born on the 4th of July, people were like, the guy from Top Gun in Cocktail is going to play this very harrowing role that's got to get from point A to point B, C, D, and all the way to Z, because this character takes such a turn. The whole point of the movie is the turn this character takes. And it's like, is an actor this young that's played parts like the parts he's played gonna be able to do this? This was probably akin to, say, like if Channing Tatum was going to be some very harrowing role in the near future today. That's probably how people felt in '89 when they learned Tom Cruise was going to take this part. So you could understand the concern. And once again, though, he had shown he has incredible acting chops with Rain Man just the year before, but I mean, this role was gonna take a real actor. And this is kind of when Tom Cruise proved, for sure, you could say he did in Rain Man, but for absolutely, completely solidified himself as, I'm not just the young heartthrob type. I'm not just, gonna be famous and then disappear when I get older. I am fucking here to stay as an actor. Because we start, and kind of the whole movie takes this turn where it starts in one point and takes us to another. Not just, it's mainly his performance. Like, his performance is practically the whole movie. But the whole movie kind of takes the same approach that his character does, where we kind of see the whole picture as a whole doing this whole thing, and Cruise is just kind of the poster child right in the front of it, directing us to that point, as well as Stone, obviously. Where we get this opening scene when they're children and they're just playing war, and they were practically obsessed with the idea of just going to battle and stuff like that, and it was a game to them back then. And to the point that we even see what it has done to people when we see the parade scene, and they're obviously just thinking like, oh, the soldiers and the Marines and all them, they're the best thing ever. I want to be just like that. But the thing is we're watching these older guys in this parade, and they don't look happy to be there, and every time a firework goes off, they flinch. But the kids don't seem to notice this. They only see Marines and soldiers being put on pedestals. And this is kind of where they want to be, and they want to be in the battle. And it's not just necessarily a surface level thing. Obviously, at the beginning, Kovic wants to do this because of how much he loves America and how much he feels like he has to do this. So it's not necessarily just I want the pedestal thing. He really does have a sincere reason for wanting to do this, but he just is so. It's just so unclear to him what the consequences of this are going to be for him, physically and just as a human being in general. And I like how, and he's still really excited about it. Like, he goes up to Kira Sedgwick and he's real excited, and he's saying, like, if I get in early enough, I'll get to be on the front line, as if that's something to be excited about. And the thing here is that we do still have, the thing that Cruise brings here early, before his character even gets to the war and turns in that way, we do get to see his inner turmoil kind of displayed here, and we actually get to see his doubts just as it's about to happen. The scene where he's talking to the crucifix, and to where it's kind of like, we see him as the fresh-faced guy that's ready for battle and ready to defend his country excitedly and all that. But there is that doubt inside him, where he talks to the crucifix and says a part of him wants to just stay at home. A part of him just wants to live in his nice neighborhood and just go about his business. But the more prominent part of him feels like he absolutely must go over there and do this, regardless of what's going to happen to him in the process. But once again, consequences don't really seem to be too much on his mind until we really see this moment where he's got this self-doubt about it. So then we jump forward and we go into battle. And this, before we go back into Cruise and the movie itself, we got to talk about Richardson's cinematography. Jesus. Because this kind of tells the whole story in itself. I talk about how Cruise is basically the movie, and he pretty much is. And of course, credit to Stone, but Richardson really tells the story of this movie in a visual way that you just have to see, that can hardly be described. Where when we start off, everything just looks very... We live in Pleasantville, where everything just looks clean and polished, and we have all the fresh faces, and, you know, the young girls and all that, and everything is just so kind of perfect and tight-knit and all that, and it just has that appearance of it where it looks like, you know, he's going to walk through his door and there's going to be a 50s laugh track and, you know, a crowd applauding, and Mother's going to serve lunch and everything's going to be hunky-dory. And then we just jump right into the war, and we go to Vietnam, and everything is foggy and smoggy and orange and dirty, and it just really, really thrusts you in there. And we learn very quickly that in this time jump, we've already gotten to Ron's second tour. And in this moment, you can kind of already see in Cruise's performance that transition. Because he's obviously not gotten to a big point yet. The big turning point when they discover the bodies. But we can tell that he has 2 tours in him already, compared to what he was right before we cut. It's almost like a Cooper cut or something, where it's like, we're just here, and then just one tiny insignificant cut, and we're just in a totally different place. Everything is different in this one cut to Vietnam. And like I said, once Cruise discovers the bodies, this character reaches a point of no return. The fresh-faced kid that we saw at the beginning is not going to return. Like, he's gone. And he tries to come out at times, but he's gone. And then, like I said, what Richardson's doing here is, at the start we lived in Pleasantville, and then we get, you know, gritty, dirty Vietnam, and then we go back home. But the thing here is that the damage is done, because you'll notice that when we go back home, it's not shot the same way it was. It doesn't look all polished and tidy and clean and all that. It looks like... It doesn't look, you know, like dirty or anything, but it's like it's foreign to us now. As it must have been to him to go from one place to the other and then back. Right here is not going to be the same. And I love that just through the cinematography, that is addressed and put on us. And obviously, at this point, Cruise's performance starts to go and go, where at first, you know, he seems like he's, like, when he sees the dog again and his mom. I love the nice dramatic moment when he sees his mom again, because obviously for any guy, that's like, that'd be like the crowning moment of coming back home after a long stay. Anywhere else, let alone Vietnam, it's when you see your mother that is the I'm really home now moment. But then obviously he gets into a fight with his brother and we realize he's still very kind of, I don't know if it's pro-war, but he's very offended when his brother suggests, why are we over there? Why is this happening? Why are all these people dying? Why? And Ron is so offended by this. And then this is where we kind of start to see, we go into him going to the hospital when he breaks his leg trying to move again, and then this is the other, and it's such a dramatic turn, because when he's in that hospital and he's kind of moving again, it's like the hospital scenes in Forrest Gump, where despite the fact that everybody is horribly injured, there's a very upbeat way about it, a very optimistic feel about it, and then it just takes one drop and we're done. And then we go right into it. And obviously Stone is known for this very in-your-face style. And what this movie does and the places that it takes us in these moments where we have these hospital scenes, it's not just the hospital scenes too, going back going back to, and not just the battle scenes either, kind of that in between, the scene, and it's usually one of the most horrific scenes in war movies. I think back to the scene with the medics in Atonement. Good God. And those moments where we're in between battle and hospital, when the medics are desperately trying to put people back together again and trying to decide. And there's like the one guy where just the doctor nonchalantly says that this guy's done. We can't just say goodnight. And there's this moment where Ron actually feels like he's reached death, where this guy comes over and reads his last rites, and it's just, it's the most intense scene in the movie. Actually, it's I really can bear to watch it. And so we get that, but then when you talk about the in-your-face style, they take us through every nook and cranny of this thing. The scene with the catheters and the bedpans, where it just really shows us the nitty-gritty and the stuff that we really don't want to see, but it's like, if you really want a movie to be told in an honest way, Oliver Stone will do that for you. And he really does it here. And it may seem like excess to a lot of audiences, but really it's like, I mean, you want to see what these guys go through, and you want to see what's really on the behind the scenes of what happens after the fact, and what these guys deal with on a regular basis. There it is, just right there on display for you. And it really kind of makes you see things in an even more kind of descriptive light, and really kind of gives you a real perspective on how to really take a good look at everything that goes into this. And that's also comes through too with it's even, obviously, while this is the cruise show, there are definitely performances that come through as well. Obviously Willem Dafoe is amazing in the little bit of time he gets here. We got the whole platoon reunion here with Willem Dafoe, and then Tom Berenger is the recruiter at the beginning, and John C. McGinley is pushing his wheelchair at in that very last scene. But Frank Whaley in this movie, too, where Frank Whaley also kind of does, he doesn't get as much to chew on as Cruise, obviously, but he does just enough with what he's got. When we see him, he's one of the fresh-faced kids. He's, obviously, nobody played a fresh-faced kid like Frank Whaley in the late 80s and early 90s. But then also, when he comes back and they reunite, and pretty much the rest of the time we see him, Whaley's character is clearly the shell of a man. And that really comes through. And it's that moment when he's talking to Whaley and they're just sitting there that Ron kind of has that turning moment. When we kind of realize that he is completely doing a 180 on how he feels about the war and everything about it. And that's really the heart and soul of this movie, is watching this. Like, it's not even the thing that Stone gets a lot of crap for is that sometimes he can seem a bit preachy in regards to the subject he's talking about. Like, obviously the war in a lot of cases, and like when he made like Nixon and W and presidential movies like that, or even talking about the media with Natural Born Killers. But I don't know, there's something so sincere in this movie that it never feels preachy. It's really just showing us a guy that experienced this war and then really felt passionate about it and was really like his entire being, and then he just switches and realizes what is really going on here and just really wants to do something about it. And he kind of reaches that moment where it becomes full circle, where when he's watching the old guys in the parade at the beginning who are flinching at the sound of fireworks, that ends up being him, obviously, when he comes back. And of course there's the people screaming at him that he doesn't understand at the time, throwing stuff at him and all that, and saying, you know, what do you do? I know it's ironic, the people who want peace are antagonizing, but still, you know, it was a very, just this whole thing was just all, it was just a really, I don't need to say this, but I'll just say it anyway, it was a really fucking shitty time period for everybody involved. And this movie really shows a guy that was able to see one particular aspect of his life in one way, and not just his life, but the world obviously, and then seeing the horrors and going through all of this, just watching, just realizing he felt like he had been going in the absolute wrong direction this whole time, and to be able to watch a dude just completely change his mind about something so incredibly crucial to pretty much his entire life, is really something to watch. Like I said, it's not even if you want to take away the war aspect, just that concept in general of somebody living and breathing for something only to realize they should be going the other way, and that they're actually able to accomplish that. And I really love that they were able to do that in a way, like I said, that doesn't feel preachy. There is a moment, obviously the very end sets up to where the ending of this movie could have been a really big, long speech. He could have gotten his Charlie Chaplin speech. But the movie ends with John C. McGinley and the crowd wheeling him off to what he's going to do, and we just stop. There's not even the "where are they now" text. The movie just ends right there. Of course, I suppose at the time there wasn't really much else to tell that we didn't already know. So I really liked that it didn't really end that. It ended exactly where it needed to. Like they were able to get to a point. They didn't overdo it. They got to a point to where they felt like they had told exactly what they needed. Obviously, it's worth noting that Ron Kovic wrote the screenplay with Stone, and it was this joint effort. And they realized the point they wanted to tell. They never overdo it. They never overstep a boundary. They just tell the story they feel they need to tell to get their point across, and for Kovic to get out why he feels the way he feels, and that's it. That's all this movie needs to be, and that's exactly what they accomplished. And it kind of shows you the differences here, where Kovic kind of realized, like, he had the war inside him, but then he realized what was wrong and was able to fix it within himself, and was able to go through life as a different person, even if, he wasn't his full self anymore. And you see how the war kind of changed him for the better and kind of showed him a different direction. And then you look at somebody like Alex Cutter, where even though it's not addressed a lot that the war made him what he is, it's still very apparent that's clearly the kind of character we're looking at. And we can tell from his violent, unpredictable attitude and his kind of, anarchist way of doing things, that the war was inside him and he wasn't able to find what Ron Kovic found. And we see how Cutter ends up at the end of his movie, and we see how Kovic ends up at the end of his. And so I think that really says something when you look at these two performances together, and how the different directions something like this can go. And both these performances show it in two totally different but beautiful ways. So, yeah, obviously, Born on the 4th of July was this big Oscar success, winning. It won director and editing. And it's weird, it did lose to Driving Miss Daisy, which some people think is weird. I do know that when Cruise, to my understanding, obviously I wasn't alive yet, but when Cruise lost to Daniel Day-Lewis for My Left Foot, I was under the impression from research that was a surprise. Like, Day-Lewis wasn't really expected to win, and it was all about Cruise that year, and his loss was actually surprising. So, but that really shows you how he got to Top Gun, to where obviously he's still in blockbuster land now. But for the most part, he's taken very seriously as an actor when he takes on parts such as this, or Magnolia, or just those really big dramatic parts, Collateral. And now he was really able to make that transition. So, and it does kind of make you miss him taking on parts like this now that he's in, big blockbuster land again. But it's nice to know that that's probably always going to be in him, and we can always count on him to, if he is, once the next time he does take on, a big meaty part, we know that he has the chops to do it. So yes, this is kind of the John Hurt tribute, as well as, might as well talk about Born on the 4th of July while we're at it. So, that's what we have here. So obviously, their performances do totally different things, but bring us to a whole here when we look at them together. As far as the better movie, obviously, Cruise's performance really stands out and is often remembered because Born on the Fourth of July was such a successful movie. It was, beloved. People still talk about it. Cutter's Way, obviously, the movie didn't live up to the performance, so the performance ultimately ended up getting lost, which sucks. But like I said, hopefully, tragic as it is that it took this to shine a light on it, at least there is a light on it now. So that's all we have. Next week I will do the one I was going to do this week, where it's a movie I love versus a movie I hate. So we'll see how that goes. A movie I hate that I haven't watched since the theater 9 years ago, so I'm gonna revisit that and see what happens. If it gets worse, or maybe it's not as bad as I remember, it's probably gonna get worse, considering what the movie is. But you'll see what that is. So yes, and tomorrow you'll be seeing. I'll have reviews for Atomic Blonde, The Belko Experiment, and Black Butterfly. So that's what you have to look forward to if you are. So yeah, that's it.